My name is Steve Little. I'm from Marion, North Carolina, and I am an attorney in Marion, have been since 1977. Do all sorts of things. I do trials, I do transactions, and have a great time practicing law. But I'm also very active in First Baptist Church and in other civic areas. I teach presently the 3rd through 5th grade Sunday school class. That's a promotion for 25 years teaching the senior high school Sunday school class. And since 2009, I've had the tremendous pleasure and honor of being the mayor of Marion. So that makes me the head cheerleader for the city of Marion. An easy position to fill. I love being there. It's a great place. Give me half a chance and I'll talk for a long time about Marion. And very active in all sorts of things. I am a flatlander by birth. Didn't have the good fortune to be born at the foothills of the mountains, but I had the good sense to move here after finishing law school at Wake Forest University in 1977. So here I am, loving what I do, and also enjoying my hobby of working, researching, and talking about the construction of the railroad in one of the most historic spots in the entire United States, which is the western tip of McDowell County, from Old Fort up to Ridgecrest, climbing the Eastern Continental Divide. My interest started when in 1968 I read the book entitled The Road, written by John Ely. John Ely is a mountain author who has written some fantastic books about the culture of the North Carolina mountains. And he wrote a historical fiction about this very project. And because I had gone to summer camp at Camp Ridgecrest, the Baptist-owned summer camp at the top of the mountain at Ridgecrest, when I was a child as a camper at night, when the lights were off, we're trying to go to sleep in the cabin, other kids are dropping off to sleep, I'm too excited, my adrenaline's going too much to sleep, too much going on, but I would hear the sounds of the train, particularly as the train would downshift coming up the mountain. A just amazingly ethereal sound to hear at night when all you hear is crickets and the train and nothing else. And I still remember that, and that's been almost 50 years ago. So the combination of being close to this spot where that story took place and reading the story just piqued my interest. So when I had to pick a theme for a history major thesis while I was a Wake Forest student, I selected the story of the construction of the railroad, of what's called the Mountain Division of the Western North Carolina Railroad, namely from Henry Station, which is about 2 miles west of Old Fort, all the way up the mountain to the western portal of the Swannanoa Tunnel at what is now called Ridgecrest. It used to be called Terrell's, and at some point it was called Bluemont, but since about the 19-teens, it's been called Ridgecrest. So that is the section. The story is absolutely amazing because of 3 main features. One is there are 7 tunnels between Old Fort and Ridgecrest. All of these tunnels out of solid rock. The shortest one is 89 feet long. The longest one, 1,832 feet long. To think about that task when you're using the second major feature, convict labor. Untrained people with a criminal background, out of their element, most of them from eastern North Carolina, never seen a mountain before, and here they're digging, pounding, blasting rock to form these tunnels. Incredible story. The third thing that is astounding about this is this was the site of the first use of nitroglycerin in the southeastern United States. It was called Nobel's blasting oil. Now that I will talk about in my program. But these three features captivated my attention. I loved doing the research. I still am doing research. After I finished college and was in law school, I wrote another paper about the history of Andrews Geyser, which was the catalyst for another coffee table history, I call it. It's easy to read with lots of pictures, and I published that about 3 years ago. But I've enjoyed doing the research. I travel. I've been as far north as Boston and as far south as Kennesaw, Georgia, where the archives are kept for the Southern Railway. The Pack Library in Asheville is an absolute treasure chest full of magnificent works and photographs. The library at UNC Asheville has a lot of good stuff. The library at Wake Forest University had a tremendous amount of really top quality old material. I found a photograph, well, it was sort of an enhanced photograph, taken in the period between 1903 and 1910. I can date it because it's the spot where the original fountain was located, the predecessor of what we now call Andrews Geyser, but the 5-story tall hotel that was beside it, which had been there until 1903, is gone. And that fountain was replaced by Andrews Geyser in 1911. So I can narrow this, but I found that at Wake Forest in a travel brochure published by the Southern Railway. Fascinating stuff. So it's a true delight for me to do the research, look for photographs I've never seen before. A serendipity occurred about 2 years ago when, after I published the book about Andrews Geyser, I was putting on a small production at East McDowell Junior High School in Marion, helping inspire children and encourage them to write little history vignettes themselves. And one student in that group wrote a story about Old Fort, her hometown. And she included 2 photographs, both of which showed the 5-story tall round knob hotel beside the original fountain. 2 photographs I had never seen, and they were the absolute best 2 photographs I had ever seen of Round Knob Hotel. And about jumped out of my skin when I saw those and asked her, where did you get these? And she said, well, my great-grandmother had them in a trunk in the attic. And I said, I would be so honored to meet your great-grandmother and see if she'd let me look at those pictures. So it's a never-ending task, and I look forward every day to maybe finding something I've not seen before. Several years ago, Southern Railway and the North Carolina Department of Transportation went together to have an excursion train that went from, I think it was Salisbury, all the way up to Asheville. The purpose was to invite law enforcement officers, people involved in the court system, to come and see the importance of safety at railroad crossings. And I was excited to ride because it meant I get to ride in the train going through the tunnels, which that's the best thing in the whole world, is going through the tunnels. On that trip, this was in 2008, I believe, and I met a fella that I had heard of before but never had the pleasure of meeting, Ray Rapp. I knew Ray was in the North Carolina legislature. I knew he was a big advocate of the restoration of passenger rail service in western North Carolina, as am I and a lot of other people. But I know Ray was in a position to speak about it and get the ear of a lot of people. It's an issue we're still working on, but he was one of the first and foremost and most effective people to get attention on that topic. He was on that train. Had the pleasure of meeting him. I told him about the first book that I had written about this, which is called Tunnels, Nitro, and Convicts. It was published right at Christmas time of that year, 2009 I think it was. So this would have been October or so of 2009. And he seemed to be very excited to hear that I had written something about this. I'd been telling the story for many years, and people would often, after I would tell the story, comment, gee, you need to write this down. It's too important to allow it to escape the memory and the consciousness of our local people. So I finally did, and Ray was very excited. I got an email from Ray's wife not long thereafter saying that she wanted to buy one of my books. It hadn't even been published yet, but she wanted to buy it so she could give it to Ray as a present. And I was so delighted because that was my first sale of my book. And I've had a second printing made of that book. But Ray Rapp got my very first copy that was ever sold of Tunnels, Nitro, and Convicts. Since then, I've had the pleasure of working with Ray on a passenger rail committee comprised of people from all over western North Carolina and even the western Piedmont of North Carolina, trying to get passenger service restored once again on what used to be the Western North Carolina Railroad from Salisbury up to Asheville, which I still think would be a wonderful thing to do, particularly in the fall, particularly in October, every single weekend. I've got a plan of how this can work. And every chance I get, I'll lobby, just as I know Ray does as well. So I've really enjoyed getting to know Ray. And I thought Ray would enjoy seeing this program that I do as the Railroad Convict. I learned and sort of realized after I continued to tell my story, after I'd published the book, that if I didn't come up with a different way to tell my story, people wouldn't buy my book. So I couldn't keep telling the exact same thing that's in the book. So I thought, I've got to come up with another approach. That's where I got the idea of, I'm going to become a convict. I'm going to tell the story from the point of view of what it was like to be a convict and doing this work. So I worked on that, thought about it. I had done so much research that I knew a lot of the factual information about what the convicts had gone through. I had found lists that showed what offenses they had committed, the counties from which they came. Nowhere, however, are their names listed, not to be found. That was the culture of the time. They didn't think they were worthy of having their names included. They were simply objects for doing work. The state relished the opportunity to use the convict labor because this was 10 years after the Civil War, and the state was broke financially. The workforce of the state was decimated from casualties and both fatalities and other injuries of men and boys in the Civil War. So 10 years after the Civil War, there's still no workforce. Even if the state could afford to hire people, which it couldn't, where are they going to go to get the people? They couldn't. One place, and that was the North Carolina Penitentiary. That was the philosophy of the time, is that convicts will not stay in a prison cell. They will be out working. And this isn't the only place that convicts were sent to perform work for the good of the state. That was their hook that justified what they did. The conditions were absolutely horrible. They were brutal. That I will talk about as the convict. And even though I learned a lot, I've done a lot of filling in between the gaps, poetic license of just thinking about it and trying to put myself back in that position, which has been interesting to do. And that's how I got the idea of doing the Railroad Convict, and looking so much forward to doing this program this evening at Mars Hill University at the Burl Hill Chapel. And I'm grateful to Ray Rapp for inviting me and Les Recker for making this possible. I'm also very grateful to Ryan Phillips for doing the videography of this. I've done the program in a lot of places. I've done it in 4 different states. I've spoken at 3 annual train shows sponsored by the North Carolina Transportation Museum in Spencer. The furthest away was June of this year, 2015, when I did my Railroad Convict program in Austin, Texas, for a family reunion of the descendants of Major James W. Wilson, who is my absolute hero in all of the history of North Carolina. He is my hero. And people who attend this program tonight will know why he was my hero, because I will talk about Major Wilson in this program. I've done it in Tennessee, South Carolina, a lot of places in North Carolina. I never tire of talking about this. I went out to Andrews Geyser several years ago when a steam locomotive was pulling a train. That draws a crowd every time, without exception. There were several people, and this was a couple of hours before the train was to come by. And I just went by, and I was going to take some pictures myself. And there was a fella getting himself in position in a really great spot beside the geyser to see the tracks and the train. And I was just talking with him and asked where he was from. And he said, "I am from Lincoln, Nebraska. And I have come from Lincoln, Nebraska just to come here. This is my destination. Andrews Geyser, Old Fort Loops, to take pictures of the steam locomotive as it goes around the Old Fort Loops." He said, "Our train club back in Lincoln, everybody wanted to come. Others couldn't, and they're so envious that I got to come to see the Old Fort Loops in person." I was intrigued and just overwhelmed when, not long after I had published Tunnels, Nitro, and Convicts, one rainy Saturday, I was looking on the internet. I just Googled Tunnels, Nitro, and Convicts. I was just curious what would pop up. I found a chat group out of somewhere in Iowa, I forget where, but they were talking about my book in Iowa. And I found also that it's available through Barnes & Noble, through Amazon, in multiple languages. Now that absolutely astounded me.
Shows the interest.
I don't know how that happened exactly, but that's fine. I don't get any commission. I thought I would get more than I do, but I didn't do it to make money, which is a good thing because I'm not making any money off of it. But it does preserve the story, and I do love telling it. Sometimes people think history is dull. This is not a dull story. This is a gripping story, and it is a part of our culture right here in Western North Carolina. However, it is of significance to people in all parts of the United States. One of the reasons that the state of North Carolina was developing a policy as early as the 1830s to have a statewide trunk line railroad was, one, to connect all of the state of North Carolina. We were not a connected state at that time. It was easier for people living in the mountains to follow the valleys and go south into South Carolina or north into Virginia for commerce, much easier than to come across the mountains into the Piedmont and then using the coastal cities and ports of this state. So that was one reason, having a way that people could get their crafts, their products, their crops to market and promote communication and to transportation. But not only that, but the bigger picture was the Midwest area was just opening up. And this was thought, wow, this is a way we can attract people from that foreign land called Tennessee and beyond, and we will be a route that people will want to follow and bring their products in. It'll promote the state of North Carolina and our people. So this was a major, major thought. But then when the Civil War came along and many other reasons, all of which deal with money or lack of money, and the geography, the eastern continental divide of the Blue Ridge Mountains coming into the western part of McDowell County. You got to get up the mountain, and so many of the people thought that cannot be done. It's the impossible railroad. You're talking about building the railroad that can't be built. So there were a few efforts that were half-hearted, and it didn't work. And then the Civil War came along, and lack of money, lack of ability, lack of manpower, then things began to happen. And that's about the moment that Major James W. Wilson came on the scene. And because of his efforts, his skill, his ability, both his ability as a scientist, as a geologist, as an engineer, and quite frankly, as his ability to work with people, caused him to succeed where others had failed. And it became a huge success. This is important into the history of North Carolina. And it's exciting to talk about it. I'm grateful to you for taking the time to look at this DVD. I appreciate all of the people who come to hear me talk about this story, telling the story of the convict. I think that's a particularly appropriate way to look at this project. They're the ones who get overlooked. But without them, it would not have happened. It would not happen if it was being started today. No way could that ever take place today. So we owe a tremendous debt to the thousands of convicts whose names are not recorded, many of whom died on this mountain for various reasons, and they are ignored. That's wrong. They need the respect of what they accomplished. The conditions were so brutal, people today would not work under those conditions. The government wouldn't allow them to work under those conditions either. But it's exciting to talk about it. I hope that you will be interested. Talk about it with your friends, encourage others to come and learn and share and find out what we can be proud of. We can be proud of our own area because of what happened here, what continues to happen here. Every single day now, 6 or 7 freight trains use this same railroad. They go through these tunnels every single day. Now, what we need is to have passengers be able to go through these tunnels and enjoy them. I've been told that Asheville, North Carolina is the most requested destination for Amtrak that is not served by Amtrak. And that to me is quite logical and probably is true. But the ability to have passengers back on this route is a goal worth continuing to strive and accomplish. Passengers last rode trains regularly in the early 1970s, probably about 1971. It's hard to define that exactly, but it's the early 1970s. There are occasional excursion trains, which are very popular, and they sell out because people all over the country, perhaps even the world, know about the Old Fort Loops, and they want to ride through those tunnels. Fascinating, beautiful, magnificent.